In today's video, we're going to talk about what is the difference between visa and status. So I often have clients who have entered the US on a visa, tourist visa or student visa, and they see on the visa, especially for a tourist visa, there's a date on it for the visa. And they ask whether they're in trouble if they're in the US beyond that expiration date. And in most cases, the answer is no, because their status has not expired. Now, is that confusing to you? Well, then let's demystify the difference between having a visa and having status in the US. So, what is this difference? Many people get confused by these terms, but they play distinct roles in your journey and your stay here in the US. So first, let's talk about a visa. Think of a visa as your entry ticket to enter the US. You go to the consulate, they approve it, they put a sticker or a kind of stamp in your passport, and then it'll have dates on it, it'll have your picture, and it will specify the purpose of your visit to the US, whether it's tourism, work, study, or any other reasons. Now, in that visa, it will also say how many times you can enter the US under that visa. It will also have an expiration date for you to use that visa. So when you arrive at the US port, the immigration officer will look at your visa, make sure it's valid, make sure you haven't passed the expiration date, and allow you to enter the US. They'll stamp your passport, and then they will write another date inside of it. Now, again, your ticket to come to the US has that expiration date. That means you have to enter the US before the original expiration date when you got it at the consulate, that document, that stamp. If you do not enter the US before that date, you can't use the visa. So that's the visa, your entry into the US. So now let's talk about status. Well, status is your legal position, your legal category in the US. So if you have a tourist visa, then you come into the US on your visa. But then once you're here, your status is as a tourist. So it's tied to your visa. Now, your status determines how long you can stay in the US. So for example, tourists, 6 months. Students, duration of stay. Employment depends on the type of employment visa. So your status is very much tied to the type of visa you came in. And once you've entered the US, we don't really have to worry about the visa. As I said before, in the passport, when you enter, the officer will stamp it and put a date in. That is the length of your duration that you can stay in the US. Even if your visa expires while you're in the US, you're okay, as long as you haven't stayed past the date that's just been written in by the immigration officer when you come into the United States. You're still what we call in status. And why is this important? Well, sometimes, some people who have come here as tourists, for example, they decide they'd like to stay here longer and study. So they can then change their status from tourist to student. Now, although, our government doesn't really like that, they say you should do it overseas, but we understand things change. You come here and you go, hey, I want to study. You can apply to change your status, but you must be in status when you do this. So that means whatever that date is in your passport that says you can only stay here this long, if you want to change it, you want to change your legal category, then you must do it for that date in order to change your status while you're in the US. In other words, you don't have to leave the US to change your status. You can only apply to change your status and not leave the US if you are in status when you apply. Again, we haven't worried about the visa because the visa just allowed you to enter the US. So that is the key difference. The visa only deals with entering the US. Status involves what you're allowed to do here and how long you can stay here under whatever category you entered under the visa. In conclusion, understanding the difference between a visa on one hand and status on the other is important for you to understand your stay in the US and for entering the US, of course. So, if you have more in-depth questions about your visa or your status, then you should seek professional guidance from an immigration attorney. That attorney can interview you and find out what is the best way to deal with your situation. Good luck, and we'll see you on the next video.